Like the title of the video says, we're going to be talking about mastery rank in Warframe and what it means for weapons. So, what do I mean by that? Well, effectively, there's this premise in the game, and it's not, I don't think it's explicitly stated, but people have kind of come to understand it in that weapons with higher mastery rank are more powerful. So we're going to talk about whether, first of all, whether or not that is true. Secondly, whether or not it is good, and third of all, whether or not, and I might reverse these two, whether or not DE is maintaining this structure in their game mechanic. So, first of all, let's talk about kind of how I have set this up. So basically what I did was I went through the website and I pulled out every weapon in the game, and I have all of their mastery rankings. I created a table based on this and I sorted it by type, and I also have the mastery rankings, and then I went to overframe.gg and I pulled the community rankings for every single weapon in the game. Now, some caveats. This includes primary, secondary, and melee weapons. It does not include all things that have mastery ranks. This includes arc guns or companions, things like that, warframes. It is only the three main types that are included in any of these figures, tables, charts, etc. Kit guns, specifically their barrels, are listed once each. This is also true of Zaws and their strike piece. This is basically to ensure that they're really only counted once because the variance between them is somewhat minute. Now, I understand that some of these can have differences in DPS and burst and etc, etc, etc. So basically each of these is only listed once per the overframe.gg community ranking that they gave to that barrel, not necessarily a complete configuration. So keep in mind there's a little bit of that going on. Next up, we have international weapons. Some of you may not realize this, but there are certain weapons in the game that are only available in certain regions, usually China. I am not including any of those in these numbers. There are not very many, so they wouldn't skew us a whole lot, but there are some. They are excluded here. I also recognize here, there's just a caveat, I recognize that the community ranking is not a true number. It is not an exact number. It is not perfect in every way. It's more of a general pulse on what is good and what isn't, where things kind of sort of should be most of the time. So while I do personally disagree with some rankings for the weapons, so I know this list doesn't meet up to my exact standards, I wanted to go with an overall ranking list so we can talk about it not just from my perspective, but from everyone's perspective. So getting in, we basically use this chart right here, and there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things. And we basically come over to these charts. So I have 3 charts here, and they all kind of tell different stories. I guess technically 4 charts. This first chart is basically going to give us a visual representation of what we're working with. So the blue line is melee weapons, the red is primary weapons, the yellow is secondary weapons. So immediately we can see that there are fewer secondary weapons than the other types. There seems to be more melee weapons than the other types, and you're also going to notice a few weird things. So, for instance, primary weapons, there aren't that many at lower levels, but they spike really, really hard at 7th mastery rank for whatever reason, and then they dip way down to 9th, and they go back down to almost none, and then they spike immediately back up and they get a lot again. So primary weapons kind of tend to exist in big groups for mastery ranks. Not sure why. You'll also notice that for melee weapons there is not a 15th mastery rank melee weapon, at least that I saw. So the blue line doesn't actually extend all the way across. So this is more of a visual primer to help understand exactly everything else that we're going to be looking at. Next up, we have the types by their community ranking, and I'll give you guys a second just to look at this and kind of process what's going on before I continue. Basically, that's probably exactly what you're thinking, and that is our first bar here is our S rank weapons. This is the total. We have A, B, C, and D. Now, in addition to this, we can see a few interesting little things about this. We see that there are a lot of D rank weapons. There are not very many S rank weapons. And we have the majority of weapons kind of falling in A, B, and C, with, you know, fewer of the better rankings. So first off, I kind of want to sit here for a second and talk about what this means. So in my personal opinion, what this means is there are too many D rank weapons for absolutely sure. I don't believe games should have D rank weapons. I don't believe that. I think if you have like a 5 rank system like this, you could arbitrarily move things around and create your own groupings, and you could always make a D tier weapon. But in a world where S tier weapons exist, you shouldn't have a D tier weapon because it's completely useless. No one will ever use that thing. Now, what makes up the majority of our D tier weapons? Well, the first thing you're probably going to say is, well, wait a second. We have training weapons, right? We have these weapons where they're called Mark 1s, they're MK1s, and they truly are supposed to be like flawed or broken weapons where they're just for training. You basically get them for free, and they shouldn't do a lot. I agree. I think there maybe should be some D weapons that fit that exact category. The place where I kind of start drawing away from that is, hey, there's these things like Skana, you know, or any of the other tons of D rank weapons that you can find, because it's not just these Mark 1s that are in there. The Lecta is a D rank. Oops. The Kestrel is a D rank. The Fang is a D rank. The Dual Skana is a D rank. The Cronus is a D rank. So you have all of these weapons that end up being very, very poorly made. That feels a little harsh, but effectively these weapons just are never going to get used. Never. Like, unless you really like the look of them, or you want more of a challenge. There's, like, I guess, reasons to have them, but in general, these are not things that you're going to be taking into missions with you. Now, on the exact flip side of that, we have a lot of S rank weapons. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but S rank weapons in this game, at least, if anything makes it into the S tier, it's usually overpowered. S is where overpowered weapons exist. If something can garner enough S rank votes to outweigh everything else, it's gonna be overpowered. Weapons in this category might include stuff like the Kuva Nukor, and they just completely change the face of the game. They're really absolutely amazing at something, usually a lot of things, and they kind of skew how the game is played. They skew the difficulty of the game, all sorts of stuff. So, how do I think this chart should be? Well, effectively, in my opinion, what I would try to do is I would try to make this a much steeper, much more even bell curve. So effectively, I think having like maybe a little bit fewer S's. I think there's too many S's here. The majority of them are melee weapons, but I think there are too many S ranks. I think there's way too many D ranks, and I think the A is probably about right. I think the C rank needs to come down. So I would probably trim some S's, trim a lot of D's, trim some C's, and stack all of that into B. I think having B as being an average weapon is a really healthy place to have a game. The majority of things falling in the average, you know, makes sense. If the median power is also the average power, I think that's a good place to have your game design at. So I think A tier weapons should be things that are always going to be pretty good, and maybe have some niche uses that make them insanely good. S tier usually break the game, and I think they probably just shouldn't exist in general, but that'll never happen, so why even mention it? And I think C rank weapons should be really considered niche weapons, right? Like, hey, this weapon is really good on Limbo, or, you know, something where it's like, oh man, I would never use this, but on that guy, God tier, amazing. And I really like that sort of synergy and methodology when making a game. Now, that being said, the D ranking does need to come down, but I wouldn't I wouldn't blow it out of existence. I think there is a place in a Warframe type game to have, you know, your Mark 1 practice weapons or your really low tier weapons. But I will say this, nothing that says Prime or Vandal should really belong in D tier or even C tier. It should be at least a B tier weapon. And I have noticed some of the weapons that are upgraded versions of other weapons do fall in the C category, and I think even a couple Ds. So we're going to move on to the final chart here, and this one is going to be the one I'm going to sit at for the rest of the video, basically, because this one I feel is really important, and it's going to tell us a lot about how the game is designed. And once we add in some spice to it, you're going to see that DE is acting weird. So let's look at this. This is rank by mastery. So basically what we have is we have these horizontal bars, and that's basically the count of weapons that are at that mastery rank. So you might have 20 of this weapon, or 20 weapons at this mastery rank, 30 at this one, 70 at that one. Well, there's nothing at 70, but you guys get the premise. The colors represent their rankings. Now we have two. We have the absolute chart to the left here, and this includes basically the actual counts. And then to the right, this more paints a story for us. So whereas we saw in the original graph, we see that at some mastery ranks we have absolutely massive growth in the number of weapons provided, and then it can tank back down. If we looked at these 7 and 9 and even 10, if you look at 10, 10's chart is going to be really big because all three of the lines are very high for rank 10. So if we come over here and look at rank 10, you're going to see there's a lot for rank 10. There's a lot for rank 7. So it's going to make the charts look a little bit different, and the bars are going to get stretched a little weird. So over here we can actually see the design intent of how they're designing masteries. So if you look at, hey, how many D rank weapons should we have at rank 7? How many C rank? How many A rank, etc., etc. That's where you're going to see it in the percentage rank by mastery chart, not the just count by rank. Now it is still pretty nice to look over here and see and say, hey, where are the majority of S tier weapons sitting? Well, that looks like it's at mastery rank 13, which I think is where Kuva weapons sit. So go figure. But looking at this a little bit further, let's jump into this percentage and just talk about this for a second. We can see a very clear pattern. You'll notice the greens are getting bigger as you go down. The oranges appear more often and in bigger numbers the further you go down. The red gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The green gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Eventually both the red and the green disappear. Or I'm sorry, the red and the blue disappear at higher mastery ranks. And then the yellow kind of doesn't really exist and then comes into existence and then starts fading out. So we can see a very clear trend in terms of mastery rank being power. So to the question, does mastery rank equate to power? Yes, absolutely it does. We can very clearly see it from this percentage ranking. However, you're going to see at rank 1, we have some really weird results. Why is that? Well, they introduced Zaws and kit guns. Zaws and kit guns completely exist outside of the norm of mastery rank being power. They all have a mastery rank of 1. So if you've been playing the game for 3 seconds, you can effectively use a Zaw. Now you're probably going to be higher than rank 1 by the time you get a Zaw or a kit gun, but you can very clearly see we have S rank weapons, we have A rank weapons, and are there that many? No, not really, but it is somewhat important. So we have 8 A rank and 2 S rank at a rank 1 mastery character level, right? So this is obviously denying the fact that mastery is power. The creation of those systems sort of go outside the norm of what DE did by creating their standalone weapons. They did this exact same thing when they created Kuva weapons. So Kuva weapons, which I think are mastery rank 13, or at least most of them are, they ignore your mastery rank requirement. You can be a rank 3 and still put on a Kuva weapon. So while they do outright say, hey, mastery is power, be 13 to use these, the game mechanics basically say, nah, you can use them anyway. So both of these more newly introduced systems go against the mastery rank as power design, and I think that's really good. Now, this is the part where I try not as hard as I can to talk about Rivens. So whenever I hear someone say that weapon isn't good, you know, and I want to use that weapon, and they say that's not good, and I'm like, well, that's stupid, and they're like, no, it's not stupid, it's low mastery rank. I actually hate that. I don't like mastery rank being low as an excuse for a weapon being crappy. It's not good design to me. It's not how I would like it designed. However, we can see very clearly from the pattern here that's how it is in the game. However, these newly introduced DE systems, or I shouldn't say new because they're not that new, but the more recent ones have been sort of ignoring these mastery rank requirements. So I would actually contend and say maybe DE doesn't even want mastery rank to equate to power. And you can also see that even though, you know, we have some of this stuff where it's like, you know, mastery rank 4, it's not a high mastery rank. Of course the weapons are going to be bad. We have D rank, C rank, B rank, and even A rank weapons at mastery rank 4. So you have A rankers in there already. So again, I ask, like, is it really just the design methodology to say, hey, we want this chart to kind of look like this, where everything shifts over? Well, again, I would contend that this is bad design. Why is that? Well, effectively, if you were to look at this at a practical level, and I think we've all done this with our weapon setups, or weapon collection, I should say. These blue weapons get deleted or used to create something else. We don't keep the blue weapons. Who cares about them, right? I have a lot of these weapons because I just want to have one of each, and some people, like the collectors, will have that. But for the people not willing to fork over a bunch of platinum just to keep a D rank on the shelf, you know, they're not going to have these. And this is also true for reds, for the C rank weapons. So I kind of ask, hey, is this kind of like a battle, not battle, whatever it's called, like Diablo or Path of Exile, ARPG, that's what I was thinking of. Do you really want to have an ARPG system where you have all this loot, but 90% of it is trash, right? I don't think that's the method that Warframe wants to have in its future, and I think some of these changes to mastery rank isn't power kind of lends to those. And I don't think the old weapons will ever really be revamped because they don't want to take ideas away from the new weapons. So I think a lot of these blue and red weapons will continue to remain lost, but I would love to see them introduce new lower rank weapons. Because most of the stuff is higher rank that they release, lower rank weapons that are good. So I think that's really going to cover everything I wanted to talk about with mastery rank and power. So it does exist in the game. Do I agree with it? Not necessarily. I think I did a good job not talking about Rivens because Rivens throw a wrench into kind of everything, and they work in a really weird way. I'll probably do a video about Rivens and how I don't like their feedback loop, but not going to talk any more about that. But if you guys have seen anything that I missed or misrepresented, let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.